Hey everybody, welcome back to the Seagull Football Network. It's great to see everybody again. We're excited to start episode 2 today. The next couple of weeks over the summer, as we get into training camp, we're going to be talking about deep dives for every division in the NFL. But first off, Braden is going to start us off on some NFL news.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick us off, I have a little bit of coaching news. Mike Tomlin and the Steelers agreed to a contract extending him through 2027. This keeps, a coach who hasn't had a losing season in his career yet with the same team, keeps him with the Steelers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really exciting move for Pittsburgh. Obviously, Mike Tomlin has been there for forever. He's gotten them a Super Bowl. I think for them, the consistency of the fact that he's won them so many years is it's comforting to re-sign him. And to an extent, Mike Tomlin has done a really good job moving on from Kenny Pickett when it clearly wasn't going to work out, bringing in Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, starting this new era. And I think that really made the Pittsburgh organization feel comfortable re-signing him and extending him, so that hopefully they can have 3, 4 more years of consistent winning seasons from him.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, we have some more wide receiver news. I know we've done a lot of wide receiver news lately, but to kick us off with those, we have Jalen Waddle, who signed a 3-year, $84.75 million contract extension with $76 million of that guaranteed. I think this came at a crucial time right before any more wide receivers got signed. I know there's been tons, and they jumped on it before the market got too big and locked up another one of their wide receivers. What are your thoughts on that deal?
Yeah, obviously we're seeing all of those 2021 draftees start to get their deals, and Jalen Waddle's a very good receiver. He has been for a good while now, so he's definitely deserving of the money that he received. I think the most interesting part about this is just recently they signed Odell Beckham to a deal, and then they extended Jalen Waddle. So Tyreek Hill, one of their other receivers, has been asking for a new deal for the last 2 or 3 years now. It'll be really interesting to see if and when they re-sign him or restructure his contract to give him that 28, 9, $30 million that he's asking for. Because now that they've signed Waddle, I feel like the clock is ticking on Tyreek Hill's patience.
For sure. Yeah. And with Tua also still needing a contract, that's a lot of money that they're going to have to commit to the offense as a whole. Obviously, they just lost Xavier Howard, so they don't have to worry as much about some of the superstars that they've had on the defense, but they still need to have a solid defense to be able to stay competitive and try to get a Super Bowl. So it'll be interesting to see how they try to handle that. Next up, the biggest wide receiver news of the offseason so far. Justin Jefferson signed a 4-year, $140 million deal with $110 million of that guaranteed. I think it's obvious how crucial he's been to the Vikings offense. Last season, when he played, they went 5-2 and only won 2 games and lost 8 when he was not playing. So he is maybe the biggest part of their offense since he started playing for them. What are your thoughts, and how are they going to move forward with this new look offense?
Yeah, I think that the Justin Jefferson signing kind of signals a change in mindset from Minnesota. They've been in kind of a competitive rebuild style for a couple of years now, and nobody really knew whether they thought they were competitive or whether they were just really wiping clean the slate and moving forward. But I think with moving on from Kirk Cousins' contract, drafting J.J. McCarthy, bringing in Jordan Addison last year, who did play very well in Justin Jefferson's absence. I think they're kind of realizing that they can be and should be competitive, and I think they're ready to start winning games now. So signing Justin Jefferson, drafting J.J. McCarthy, I mean, that gives them a 4-year timer where they've got both those guys permanently under contract, and that is a huge thing for them. So I think Minnesota's pretty set on being a competitive team the next couple of years, and it'll be interesting to see whether they can make a playoff push.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really looking forward to seeing if the JJ to JJ connection develops into something really cool. Next up, Nico Collins, wide receiver for the Texans, signed a 3-year, $72.75 million deal with incentives up to $75 million, and $52 million of that guaranteed. Honestly, solid wide receiver. Not as much money as the other two we talked about today, but he's not quite the the superstar for that offense that the other two are. He's obviously a solid piece with alongside Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs, but he's not really the core piece of the offense that would get him the huge contract that we're seeing with the other two.
Yeah, I think Houston's got a lot of weapons in that offense, right? They have Nico Collins, they've got Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and I think they're aware of that fact, and so I'm sure that that came up in contract talks. And the other thing is, Collins is due for an extension, being I think a third rounder in 21. But it's worth noting he didn't really have that kind of a season until last year. He had, I think, like 400 and then 500 yards. And this past year, he had 1,300. So I'm sure that it was a conversation of, hey, we have a lot of weapons. You haven't been the most consistent. We'll give you good money, but not great money. And I'm sure that Nico's okay with that being in arguably a Super Bowl caliber roster right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Last but not least, for our news section, we have the new Madden 25 cover player, Christian McCaffrey, who signed a 2 year, $38 million extension. I really think this is my favorite deal out of the ones we've talked about today. It's a solid amount of money, but not really overpay for one of the best players on one of the best teams right now.
Yeah, I'm loving seeing a running back get a little bit of attention. As we saw over the last couple of years, running backs are kind of being devalued a little bit. So it's great to see somebody like Christian McCaffrey get the bag and get the money that he honestly deserves. The 49ers are going to be competitive every year that they have Kyle Shanahan, but it's great to see them keeping a player like Christian McCaffrey because of all the players on that roster, he's one of the ones who makes them a competitive team right now. I think that it's a really great signing for him, a really great signing for San Francisco. The really interesting part for me, though, is that they were so willing to hand out Christian McCaffrey's contract, and yet there's still been seeming some uh, concern with Brandon Ayuk's deal over in San Francisco. He still has not gotten a deal, and there have been some trade talks. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even like right before the draft, there was some talk of maybe trading him to move up, get some better picks. And when that didn't happen, I figured, oh, they're probably going to sign him to a new contract. And here we are in June, and nothing's happened yet. So it's I don't know, a little concerning, a little bit interesting. I'm curious to see what ends up happening with Ayuk because he has looked really, really solid over the last couple of years, and I think he deserves a new contract. But at this point, it's going to be very, very expensive to actually hand that out to him.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously, I feel like we had this exact same controversy with Debo Samuel. What was it, 2 years ago now? And he ended up getting his deal. So I expect something to happen soon, probably by the end of training camp. But it'll just be very interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into our first division deep dive. We are starting out with the AFC West, and what better team to start with than the Kansas City Chiefs? So, our first topic that we're going to discuss is the team's biggest strength. Ben, do you want to kick us off? What's your opinion?
Yeah, so it's hard to call a biggest strength on arguably the best NFL team in the league for the last 2 years straight, potentially more years than that. But I kind of went with the gimme pick here. I think the Chiefs' biggest strength is quarterback Patrick Mahomes. Um, as long as he's the starter on the Chiefs, they have a legitimate shot at the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes is an elite player, right? He's going to make any team around him competitive. Some teams more than others, they still need to build around him, but there's no question that Patrick Mahomes is the strongest player on that team. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw last year what happens if you don't provide Mahomes with the weapons that are going to optimize his strengths. His production goes down. Now, still won a Super Bowl, right? I mean, even his down production is still championship worthy. But when he doesn't have wide receivers, and especially not deep threats, he's going to be less productive overall. And we saw their offense reduced a little bit, which kind of brings me to what I think is their biggest strength. Now, this is going to be kind of a funnel here. First off, I think it's the offense in general. I think their offense is going to be the Chiefs' biggest strength. Anytime Andy Reid is calling plays, it's going to be solid. But I think the biggest thing that's going to help improve their offense over last year is the improved speed that they have at wide receiver. after signing Marquise Brown as well as drafting Xavier Worthy. They've got speedsters ready to get as far down the field as possible, and Mahomes has already been launching multiple deep balls to them in practice. But I think that the player that this is going to help the most is going to be Travis Kelce. I dove into some of their film from this season, and I paid attention to a couple specific things. Most of which was what the safeties and linebackers were doing when they played against the Chiefs. And what I was noticing is that I saw quite a bit of cover two, fairly normal, but a lot of what I saw as well was cover one with only one high safety, and the defenders would crowd the middle of the field, the middle 5 to 10, 12 yards, crowded with linebackers and safeties. And so specifically, I took a look at the Chiefs Jaguars game, which was one of their lowest scoring. The first time that the center of the field got left open, they kind of safeties dropped back, corners were out to the outside, and linebackers all pulled back as well. Travis Kelce got open for a big 16-yard gain. It ended up getting called back for holding, but still a huge gain in the modern NFL. And then later in the same game, they started kind of crowding the defense. And then I watched, and the linebackers all dropped back to around 12 yards off the line of scrimmage. And Kelce got another big reception. Then I kind of looked at what his worst game was statistically, which was against Miami. And it didn't take very long for me to notice they just crowded the middle of the field with linebackers. Safeties never stayed. Looked at what his worst game was statistically, which was against Miami. And it didn't take very long for me to notice they just crowded the middle of the field with linebackers. Safeties never stayed too far back. They stayed kind of close, crowding that space that Kelce likes to operate in. And then in his best game against the LA Chargers, they were doing the exact opposite. People were leaving the middle of the field wide open. They were leaving whole sides of the field open, but it was all in that 10 to 15 yard range where Kelce operated the most. And so I think what's going to happen is with Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown being able to get up the field, they're going to have to commit safeties and linebackers to start dropping back and leaving that middle of the field more open, giving Kelce one-on-one opportunities. And I think he's going to have just an amazing season this year.
Yeah, kind of going with what you were saying. Obviously, the Chiefs, Travis Kelce is the player that he is because of we've watched for years now. The offense is wide open. Defenses are responding as they normally do. But Kelce has always done something different. He will just go and he'll find the spot in the zone that's open, and that's usually in the middle of the field. Mahomes knows kind of where to look. And as you said, as the years have gone on, teams have started responding to that. And unfortunately, the Chiefs had gotten used to saying, "Hey, we don't need the best pass catchers in the league because we have Travis Kelce." But when defenses start responding to Travis Kelce, it's harder to play with, Marquez Valdez Scantling, unfortunately. Um, so I agree with you to an extent that their speed on the outside that's going to really stretch that defense will help Kelce become a little bit more of a threat than he was before.
Yeah. So next up, we've got what is the biggest weakness for the Chiefs? What are your thoughts on their biggest weakness?
So, in my opinion, the biggest weakness on the Chiefs, and it's funny to say something like this because it's still a decently strong part of their roster, but I think that the weakest part of the Chiefs is their offensive line. Particularly offensive tackle. So last year, interior they had a really strong group of guys. They had Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, right? That's a strong interior. But on the outside, they had Juwan Taylor on at right tackle, and then at left tackle they had Donovan Smith. Donovan Smith was I think 33 or 34. He started showing his age a little bit. He's always been a really good offensive tackle. He's won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. He's won a Super Bowl with the Chiefs. He's not bad, but he did start to show his age a little bit. And this year, the Chiefs elected to not re-sign him. At right tackle, they have Jawan Taylor. Jawan Taylor was one of the worst graded starters in the NFL last year. Not just worst graded offensive linemen, worst graded starters in the NFL. He was also one of the most penalized players in the NFL. And normally that would scream, get rid of this player. Unfortunately, he signed such a large contract with Kansas City that they really can't afford to get rid of him. So going into this year, they're going to be starting Jawan Taylor again. How that's going to work out ultimately is what we'll have to see. I am a very big fan of their offensive line coach, Andy Heck, who has been around since 2013. Since Andy Reid became head coach there in Kansas City. So if anybody can continue to work with Jawan and help him become a better player, I think Andy Heck can. But it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. As for left tackle, you may be wondering what move they made to kind of fix that side of the line. I think a pick that kind of flew under the radar a little bit was the 63rd pick of the draft in the second round. The Chiefs took BYU offensive tackle Kingsley Suamataia. I'm a really big fan of him. Big guy, but incredible mover. He's really strong. I haven't seen a faster get off since maybe Tevin Jenkins with the Chicago Bears now. And I'm a really big fan of Suamataia. There's an argument to be made that if they had kept Donovan Smith around, maybe to help him learn a little bit first, develop, Kingsley could use that. But I think at the price tag that Donovan Smith was at, the Chiefs decided to just move on and keep Suamataia. So I think that while Suamataia can become a very good player in the NFL, I think his tackles will definitely be spotty going into the 2024 season.
Yeah, so I have their just depth in general. I don't think that their quality when you get down into the depth of their team really stands up to the starting 22. I think really they just need to hope that nobody major gets injured. Otherwise, they're going to have a really bad time later in the season and potentially miss out on some of the success that they'd have otherwise.
Yeah, I can definitely see that being an issue. Now, the Chiefs' strength and conditioning team has been one of the best in the league over the last couple of years. So if I doubt that they will have injury issues, but if they do, it could be devastating.
All right, next up we have kind of the X factor. This is the person whose health and availability is going to determine the outcome of the team. Somebody who really makes the difference when it comes to this team. And I feel like for the Chiefs, this one's a little bit obvious. I have Patrick Mahomes. We kind of already talked about that and how he is the offense. He is the power behind it. Kelsey's absolutely important. They have other important pieces, but Patrick Mahomes really makes any offense the best in the league.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna go a different route on mine. Um, I called my X factor the pass catching core as a whole. The reason I say this is outside of Travis Kelsey, there really isn't much guaranteed with this group of guys. We can all talk about Marquise Brown, who has been a 1,000-yard receiver in the past. We can talk about Xavier Worthy, who ran the fastest 40-yard dash in NFL history. We have playmakers, but trading up to draft Xavier Worthy over Xavier Legette, Lad McConkey, A.D. Mitchell, some others. I would say it's head scratching, but it's not necessarily the worst move. If anyone can make that work, the Chiefs can. There has to be opportunity, and he has to be ready for that opportunity when it comes. Somebody like Marquise Brown, it's a really solid surface level signing. But given injury concerns and maybe his versatility, I don't know if I see him as a true number one. So again, there's question marks there. Obviously, Kadarius Toney hasn't done a whole lot since being traded to Kansas City. And then Rashee Rice absolutely should be a starter on this team. He was one of the best yak play receivers last year. But I think that it'll be a question mark whether he can develop into a true receiver, as well as whether he will continue to be a liability off the field. You look at the receivers they have below that: Sky Moore, Justin Watson, Miko Hardman, their international player, Louis Reese Zamet. They'll all make the roster, but I think that none of them are really an every down versatile receiver with a full skill set. So I think that the Chiefs definitely can and will do well in terms of pass catching. But I think that if things start to go awry there, that could make or break the season. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think the the pass catchers, wide receivers, they're going to be really kind of a pivotal factor here. I really think Hollywood Brown is the number one receiver. I think he's going to be the best statistically. I don't think Rashee Rice is going to be that far behind. I think he had a solid season last year, especially coming into an offense that wasn't performing at the highest caliber. Uh, After that, I think it really goes to Xavier Worthy and then drops off even further. I don't think Kadarius Toney is really he really hasn't contributed a whole lot overall to the team. So uh, and then they've got Mecole Hardman as well, who I think he's going to contribute, but just not as much as Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown are. But I agree. I think the wide receivers are going to be pivotal, and their performance is going to be indicative of that team. All right, next up, we're going to talk about notable rookies. My notable rookie that I picked is actually not somebody that they drafted. I picked Louis Rees-Zammit, the rugby player that they signed as the UDFA. Yeah, I loved it when I first started reading about them signing him, and I love it even more now after their first week of rookie minicamp. I was reading reports that he was doing really well, practicing at the running back position. Apparently, he took a nice screen pass for a big game, kind of just got right into the groove, and he has a really good sense of the space around him, and that's something he picked up from rugby. And I think with him only being 23 years old, he's got a lot of opportunity to really contribute to this team, as well as the fact that they're considering sticking him at the kick returner position, which could be phenomenal given the new kickoff rules.
Reese Zamet's a really interesting player because of his international status. I think that Reese Zamet is a really large reason why they didn't re-sign Jarek McKinnon. I think that they're both going to fill kind of the same role for Kansas City, kind of a gadget, a running back, a receiver. You can put him in the slot, you can put him back in the backfield, you can give him screen passes, handoffs. He's really flexible, and then he's got insane value at the return position. And I think that that's why they didn't bring back Jarek McKinnon. Is Louis Rees-Zammit is the same guy, just 23 years old and a rugby player. And I'm so excited to see him become something big because the international program that the NFL runs is very great and I love what it does, but unfortunately it doesn't lead to the greatest results all the time. The only IPP player that we've seen really go the distance in the NFL so far is Jordan Mailata with the Philadelphia Eagles. Outside of him, we see some players bounce on and off practice squads. Sometimes they make a roster, but typically they don't stick. Reese Zammit will, and I'm very confident in that fact. So for me, I had some interesting thoughts on kind of their whole draft class. Xavier Worthy, I feel like it was a little bit of reach. Kingsley Suamataia, super excited about him. Jaden Hicks, I think, will make quite an impact on the defense. But my notable rookie for today is the player that they took in the fourth round, 131st overall, and that is tight end Jared Wiley. Jared Wiley, expect a really interesting season from him. It appears that the Chiefs are preparing for life after Travis Kelsey. I don't think that Kelsey's going to retire in the next 2 to 4 years, but Wiley is insurance in the event that he does or that he gets injured. I think they've been looking for a Travis Kelsey replacement and or supplement for a while now with Noah Gray, Blake Bell. But I really liked Wiley as a pass catching tight end. He resembles Kelsey in his ability to line up wide or in line. I think he's definitely going to need some work in the blocking part of his game. But I've never seen a focus drop from him, and he has a really diverse route tree for a tight end coming into the NFL for the first time. Most tight ends don't. He really resembles Travis Kelsey in those ways, and I think that he's somebody the Chiefs really think they can mold into a Travis Kelsey like player. So it'll be really interesting to see where they go from there.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. That's a great rookie, and I think it'd be really interesting if they did manage to replace Kelsey when he does decide to retire.
Yeah, and if you look into kind of the numbers, obviously Matt Nagy and Andy Reid have been running a 21 offense for a while now, being two tight ends and one running back. And it'll be very interesting because in the past it's been like I said, Noah Gray or Blake Bell, and they're good tight ends, but not what they're looking for really. They want the versatility to be able to put them all over the field, and I think Wiley complements Kelsey in the fact that they can both do that.
All right, so that completes that section. Now we're going to talk about the biggest games for the Chiefs. I have four that I've kind of picked out as maybe the ones that'll make or break the Chiefs season. You can let me know if any of these overlap with yours, and we can briefly discuss each game. First one I have was pretty easy. Week 1 versus Baltimore. The AFC Championship rematch. I mean, that's obviously going to be a huge game. We talked about this previously as well. It's a big game. What are your thoughts on that game specifically?
Yeah, yours overlaps with mine. My first two were week one versus Baltimore and week two versus Cincinnati. Um, I think that being both AFC games early in the season, it's really going to set the tone for who's kind of the big boss in the AFC in the first couple of weeks. I think that obviously Baltimore is a Super Bowl contender this year. Cincinnati might be there. I think there's some wishy-washiness there, but I think that both of those teams are going to be very, very good. And Kansas City's going to be hard pressed to come away with a 2-0 record at the end of it. So it could be really tone setting for the entire season.
Yeah, absolutely. I also had Cincinnati as my number two. I know the Cincinnati Bengals usually get off to a pretty slow start in the early part of the season. So that might be the Chiefs' easier win of those two, but it's possible that they can break patterns pretty easily and take a win from the Chiefs there. The next game I had on my list was Week 7 at San Francisco. We had the AFC Championship rematch, and now we have the Super Bowl rematch between these two teams. It's pretty early in the season, so they should both still be pretty fresh overall, and I think it could be a really exciting game to watch. And then the fourth game that I had on my list and the last one is Week 16 versus Houston. It'll be CJ Stroud's first matchup against Patrick Mahomes, and I think overall it'll be a really good game to see what the Texans are really made of against potentially the best team in the league. Obviously, the Chiefs have a pretty solid defense overall, but it's really the offense that's going to test them, and it's going to make CJ Stroud really compete to keep up with Mahomes.
Yeah, that one definitely was close to making my list. It didn't quite make my list just because it's an NFC matchup. But it definitely is going to be a game that really sets the tone for the playoffs because I think that we all could see the Chiefs and the Niners making the Super Bowl again. Um, so I agree, it's definitely an impactful game for the season. My next two were Week 15 at Cleveland and Week 16 versus Houston. I kind of picked two sets of games that were, kind of gauntlets, if you will, back-to-back games that are going to really hurt. Um, I am not so sure about Deshaun Watson going into next season, but I think that Cleveland as a whole is going to be a very, very good team. And it's going to be a tough game for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Week 16, obviously, I completely agree. I could see Week 16 versus Houston being almost a redo of the 2018 game of Los Angeles versus Kansas City. Jared Goff versus Patrick Mahomes. It was a 53-50 or something like that final score. I could very well see this game being like that one. Two offensive masterminds playing against each other, and it would just be an absolute shootout. Um, so that's going to be a really interesting set of games, especially going into late season where teams are starting to get tired, teams are starting to prep for the playoffs. Very challenging game for Kansas City.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be in December when you want to play your best fall. There in the winter, December, January, and so it's going to be, it really me whoever wins that game ends up taking the AFC later down the road. So it'll be a really interesting matchup to keep an eye on. All right, with that being said, we're going to wrap up with the Kansas City Chiefs and we're going to move next to the Las Vegas Raiders. So to start us off, what do you have down as their biggest strength?
For the Las Vegas Raiders, it was a little difficult. I was just kind of going through some stuff with the Raiders earlier, and I was intrigued because I think the Raiders aren't, excuse me, a bad team necessarily. I think that they have some parts that are not super strong. But the really interesting part was I couldn't find just one part of the team that really, really stood out to me. I ended up going with the defensive line. Max Crosby, I think, is good no matter what, right? I think he had 13 sacks last year, and that was with absolutely no help. Um, with the signing of Christian Wilkins, right, from Miami. The three down linemen being Christian Wilkins, John Jenkins, Adam Butler. They go from good to great because I think that they were already very, very good in the run defense, and now Christian Wilkins is going to help with the pass defense, having achieved 9 sacks last year with Miami. Um, and then obviously, once again, not a huge playmaker, but retaining Robert Spillane on the other side of Max Crosby is going to be very strong. He's a lot better in the run game, but obviously, I think with Max Crosby, he makes a good weapon on the outside for that pass rush as well.
Yeah, I agree. I also put down Max Crosby in the D line generally, but I don't really know that they are even half as good if he wasn't on the line with them. He really makes the entire line so much better. He brings energy, he brings just pure chaos to every offensive line he faces. He is a force to be reckoned with 100%. So I agree hands down he is the Raiders' biggest strength. As for their biggest weakness, this one I kind of bounced back and forth for a little bit. I was like, is it the quarterbacks? Is it the running backs? Is it the wide receivers? I finally just settled on it's the offense. The offense is going to be their weakness. I'm not a they just have too many players who are just kind of okay or unproven. Starting at running back, Zamir White, he's had two good potential years, but nothing really overall impressive. He only had 104 carries last season. He hasn't had a full workload at any point. And so I'm not sure that he's going to be able to take on the starting role. And then you pair him with Alexander Madison, whose last season was his best in his career, but he only had 700 touchdowns or 700 yards. I apologize, 700 yards rushing and no touchdowns. Then you look to their quarterbacks, who if you can't have good running backs, now you're passing the ball all the time. And we have Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, neither of whom is the best ever. Minshew, I think, is a more solid option, but even his magic runs out at some point. We saw that last year with the Colts. There were just some games where he couldn't put it together enough to win. And then even their wide receiver room is limited outside of Devontae Adams. They have Jacoby Myers, who's barely cut 800 yards the last couple seasons, and Michael Gallup, who hasn't had more than 450 yards in the last 3 seasons. So overall, you're looking at maybe 2,000 yards between those three top receivers. I just don't know who else is going to be out there catching the ball besides Brock Bowers, who is unproven in the NFL. I think he'll be solid. Um, but who knows? He could fall into the same Kyle Pitts pattern where he just isn't as impressive as everybody thought he was going to be. And even then, a rookie tight end I don't think is going to change the whole game for them. So I'm going to say their offense is the biggest weakness, just almost across the board.
I can see where you're going. I kind of disagree to an extent. I think that Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, we pretty much know what they are. They're proven prospects. It's pretty much Brian Hoyer and Brian Hoyer in the making. I mean, it's not they're good if you really have to play them, but they're not some kind of magical great quarterback. I can agree with that. Zamir White, I think, is going to be a little bit more impactful than what everybody expects. But again, I can see where you're going. Devontae Adams is still one of the best receivers in the league, but I can also see with subpar quarterback play, it can be a little tough. Jacoby Myers, Michael Gallup feels like a weak attempt at trying to build a good receiver core. So again, I see where you're going. I will push back on the Brock Bowers thing. I think that he's going to be a very good tight end for a very long time. He can play a lot of different positions, a lot of different places on the field. Really dynamic player. But for me, my biggest weakness is the offensive line. Outside of Colton Miller, there was really nothing great on that line. Dylan Parham and Andre James last year were just uninteresting. It's not like they were bad, but they were uninteresting. Being interior offensive linemen, they didn't help in the run as much as they should have. They allowed, some more pressures than they probably should have. Then on the other side of the line, they completely rebuilt the right side of their line, bringing in Cody Whitehair from Chicago and Andres Pete from New Orleans. And Cody Whitehair has been showing his age, both in ability and availability, for the last couple of years. And Andres Pete never really lived up to the first round billing. He was the 13th overall pick, I think, in 2016 or something like that. Um, He's also been showing some age in the last couple of years. He's been missing some more games every single year. So I think that that was just really not a very logical move at trying to get better on the offensive line. I will say they drafted Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon in the second round, 44th overall. Outside of Graham Barton, I would say that he's probably the best inside offensive lineman in the league, or in that draft. Sorry. And I think that when he starts, he's going to grab onto that position and he's not going to look back. But I don't think he's going to start week one just because of the amount of money that they're paying Whitehair and Pete. I do expect one of them to end up missing a couple of games, though, and that's when I expect JPJ to step in. But until that time, offensive line will remain my biggest weakness.
Gotcha. All right. So that brings us next to the X factor. Who do you have listed as the X factor for the Las Vegas Raiders?
So I didn't push this one too much earlier just because of I knew it was my X factor. My X factor is Brock Bowers, tight end out of Georgia. I am absolutely in love with him as a player. He is an incredible prospect. I believe, I genuinely, truly believe this. If Brock Bowers plays up to the talent that he has, I think he could single handedly save the job of Aiden O'Connell, Luke Getzey, Antonio Pierce, potentially Tom Telesco, their general manager. I mean, he could be the job saver in Las Vegas. Generational talent. He can play at numerous positions: H back, Y tight end, inline tight end. He can do it all, and he's just going to get better. If Luke Getzey, their offensive coordinator, can use him correctly, I expect incredible play and probably 1,000-yard season from Brock Bowers. He's going to be a go-to target for either O'Connell or Minshew, just because, as you mentioned earlier, their pass catching core is maybe not the strongest. There's maybe a dearth of good receivers there. So Bowers is going to be the go to guy. And I think while Luke Getzey proved in the past couple of years with Chicago, he isn't great at play calling. When you have somebody like Brock Bowers on the roster, you give the ball to him. You give the ball to him no matter what. So I think that we're going to see that a lot. If Bowers is good, Las Vegas won't be that bad.
I had Max Crosby again as the X factor. I don't think the defense performs if he isn't there. Similar to how TJ Watt has been the last years. When he's injured, when he's not playing, the whole team suffers for it. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. Notable rookie I have, who you mentioned earlier, Jackson Powers Johnson. I think he is going to be a solid addition on that offensive line. I had him going, I think, to the Lions in my mock draft.
Mhm.
Um, I think he's going to be an impactful player. I think he's a solid prospect. He's one of the few guys in this draft that I actually watched film for, and I liked what I saw out of him. So I think he's going to have a chance to get in there, and he might help improve the chances of Zamir White and Alexander Madison to really have impacts as well on the field. Maybe he's the key to unlocking that offense. We'll see.
Yeah, I will say, as our viewers know, I'm a pretty big Chicago Bears fan. I was sitting there on the second day of the draft, just praying that JPJ would drop because I absolutely love him as a prospect. He's got speed, he's got strength, very good inside offensive lineman, can play both guard positions and center. Um, Obviously, Las Vegas took him at 44, well before Chicago was on the clock, but he is also my notable rookie. If he gets on the field, no, sorry, when he gets on the field, he will not look back. Cody Whitehair, Andres Pete, whoever drops, he will hold that job for the rest of his career. JPJ is a very good offensive lineman, and it's going to look very good once he's on the field.
All right. So last up for the Raiders, let's talk about their biggest games. Personally, I have a couple that are tough games, but really I think the most important for them are going to be their divisional games. I don't see them really being a playoff contender. Maybe they can sneak in at the 7 spot. I just don't really see it happening. So I think the biggest thing for them is going to be to try to keep their division rivals out of the playoffs, or at least in the worst position possible. Obviously, they had the really great game against the Chiefs last year. They had a really great game against the Chargers. They're going to want to continue that streak. and especially they've had a lot of talk about beating Mahomes again. They do not want him to continue beating them, and so I think the divisional games are going to be the biggest thing for them to really focus on winning. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of went the same direction as you. I agree divisional games are going to be really interesting this year in the AFC West, outside of the Chiefs, obviously, likely. But my biggest games were specifically week 1 and week 18, in which they are at Los Angeles and then versus Los Angeles. The reason that I picked Los Angeles specifically is this is two new coaches going up against each other. Clearly, Kansas City is the champion of this division. Everybody knows Kansas City is the top dog, and they will be probably as long as Mahomes is in Kansas City. But what I think Las Vegas versus Los Angeles is going to establish is who's that runner up? Who's going to be in the playoffs every year, even if they're not the division champ? And it's Jim Harbaugh versus Antonio Pierce. It's you know Aiden O'Connell versus Justin Herbert, if you will. And it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how that plays out this year. And I think both teams are going to be vying for that second spot this year.
Yeah, I could see those being important games. Hopefully not quite nail biters like the one from a couple years ago, the overtime where both teams were trying to tie it until the Los Angeles Chargers took a timeout. It was a rough game to watch overall. That being said, let's move on to our third team of the night, the Denver Broncos. My biggest strength for them, I have their O line. They've got 4 out of 5 returning. I know they weren't the best in the league last year, but I think they were overall pretty solid. And really, center is the biggest question mark after Lloyd Cushenberry went to the Titans. Um, but I think it's going to be really important for them to maintain playing at a high level, especially with the two quarterbacks that they have that have a chance at starting. It's either going to be probably Bucks or Zach Wilson. If I had to guess, probably Bo Nix, and it's going to be really important for them to keep him safe, protected, and in one piece if he's going to have a chance at developing correctly. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually went the same direction as you. I went offensive line. I think that Garrett Bowles and Mike McGlinchey are potentially the best tackle duo in the NFL. Ben Powers, Quinn Miners, both major movers on the inside, very good run blockers. Unfortunately, they lost their other run blocking bud, Lloyd Cushenberry III, just like you talked about. I think we're going to see a really interesting battle between two late round centers in Luke Wattenberg and their rookie Nick Gargilo. I hope to God that I didn't mess that one up because he's got an interesting name. Um, but I think Nick Gargilo is the better center overall. I did watch a little bit of him, product out of Yale, transferred to South Carolina. Um, but Luke Wattenberg could win the job just off of experience. He's a 2022 fifth rounder. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of how that goes. But regardless of who's at center, I think that as a whole, this offensive line is going to protect whoever's at center, likely Bo Nix, very, very well. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, we have our biggest weakness. What do you have as the biggest weakness?
So as a biggest weakness, I have the entire Denver Broncos defense. I just to start off with, Vance Joseph has not been the greatest defensive coordinator in the past 5 years or so. It's been a minute since he's really, really shown up as somebody who's a needle mover on the defense. But then when you're looking at personnel, outside of Patrick Surtain II, this defense is just lacking playmakers. Their signing of Cody Barton out of Washington is solid. He's a good linebacker. I think he lacks some vision to an extent. Jonah Ellis, they drafted, I think, out of Utah in the second round, and I think he is going to be very good eventually. But I don't think that he's really. I think they're going to have to try him at outside linebacker versus defensive end, 2 feet or 3 point, and kind of figure all of that out before he becomes a star. Outside of Sertan, there's really no star players on the defense. The signing of safety Brandon Jones out of Miami, it feels really half-hearted as a replacement to Justin Simmons, and him and PJ Locke are probably going to struggle against the pass all season, frankly. The front seven are okay at pass rush. okay at run defense, but it's not even like everything's bad on the defense. It's just unexciting, and frankly, teams are going to figure them out really quickly, I think.
Yeah, I agree entirely. My biggest strength, I said, was the O line. My biggest weakness, I said, was everything else. So we went similar paths there. I just really am not impressed with this team at all. I think I was scrolling through their roster earlier, and really the only names that stood out to me as being potential like big contributors are Pat Surtain, Javonte Williams, maybe, Greg Dulcich, and Josh Reynolds, again, maybe. I just don't love the roster top to bottom. It's just not my favorite, and I'm not convinced that Sean Payton is going to really whip them together into something that's going to be impressive.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm on record to not really be a big Sean Payton believer. I think that Sean Payton is very similar to Bill Belichick in the sense that he's a good coach, but he definitely benefited from having a Hall of Fame quarterback who everybody looks up to, just an absolute generational talent of a quarterback in Drew Brees. I think that Sean Payton is trying a little too hard to rebuild the Saints here, bringing in Lil Jordan Humphrey, Adam Troutman, players like that where he knows them. Um, and I think that he's going to find that Bo Nix isn't exactly Drew Brees. So I can agree with you there that there's going to be some bumps in the road. And if I were to call it right now, I think Denver very well could be last in this division.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that entirely. As for my X Factor, I couldn't decide between whoever starts at quarterback or Patrick Surtain because I think they're basically in the same position that their of the ball depends 100% on how they're performing. Surtain is going to be the only guy who can really cover in the secondary. It's going to be him one on one with whoever the opposing team's best receiver is, and the quarterback position is going to be crucial, especially when they just don't really have a whole lot else impressive on the offense. So, what do you have as the X factor?
So my X factor is not whoever's starting at quarterback, it's quarterback Bo Nix. Because if Bo Nix isn't the starter week one, then he's already a bust, and I don't see that regime in Denver lasting much longer. Bo Nix needs to be their future if they want to survive another season as the coaches. Um, I think Bo Nix is not, Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams, but I think he could be very good in a system like Sean Payton's. With Troy Franklin being their draft pick in the second round, I think that that's going to provide a familiar target for Nix. And I think that if he turns out a solid quarterback, which I believe he can, then this Denver offense will be a lot more competitive than anyone ever expected. Great, top of the league, probably not. But Bo Nix is the X factor. If the Denver Broncos are going to compete anywhere close to their ceiling, Nix needs to be the starter and he needs to be good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think he probably has the best chance at starting. I hope he does well, but there's obviously a lot of question marks there with the weapons and not quarterback is the hardest position to get position from college to the NFL. It's so hit or miss, and quarterbacks that look amazing in college often fall flat in the NFL, and vice versa. You have mediocre quarterbacks or quarterbacks from small schools who end up doing really, really well. Tom Brady or Josh Allen, for example, not drafted high, not from impressive schools, end up being really, really solid quarterbacks in the league. So there's a lot of question marks there, and we'll just have to see when if he gets a chance at playing at the NFL speed, what he does with that opportunity. And speaking of Knicks, he is my notable rookie. I think with him probably being launched into this hot seat of protecting Sean Payton's job, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him, and how he performs is going to be crucial for this season.
I agree completely. That's kind of what I talked about with him as my X factor. For my notable rookie, I am going his Oregon, now Denver teammate, Troy Franklin. Um, I think that Sean Payton, in his pursuit of rebuilding the New Orleans Saints in Denver, the Mile High Saints, if you will, I think that he got his Michael Thomas. Troy Franklin wasn't everyone's favorite receiver. because he lacked some play strength. He wasn't very linear with his route tree. There was, some early talk of him going in the first round, and the further that the draft talk went, the more it started coming out that teams just weren't a fan of him. But I think that Troy Franklin is a very good fit for what Sean Payton's going to be running in Denver. The routes he runs are great. His strongest routes are slants, crossers, things like that. It very much makes me think Michael Thomas. He will be invaluable to this offense's timing plays. And he will be a number one receiver in Denver, I think, especially with the Cortland Sutton controversy that we're having right now. That's why Troy Franklin's my notable rookie. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, Cortland Sutton wants a new contract. He was briefly holding out. He did show up to the mandatory camps. But honestly, even he's not really that great of a receiver. I really think they need somebody to step in and take the number one position. And if Troy Franklin can do that, more power to him. I think that's probably the best thing that could happen for Denver at this point. So next up, we have biggest games. I couldn't really. It was I was struggling to pick one here. I don't think again I don't think the Broncos are going to be impressive. I don't think they have a shot at the playoffs. So the game I think we need to keep the biggest eye on is Week 7 at the Saints. We get to see Sean Payton up against his former team. I really think if he can't pull this one off, that might be his last season with Denver, even though he's only 2 years in. I think it's going to be a big game for him personally, emotionally, etc. And the Saints weren't a very good team last year, and if he just can't pull this one off, I think the organization might start to lose some faith in him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree completely. I actually have two games that are very similar to that. Like I said, I agree with you. I don't think Denver's going to be very competitive, frankly, at all. So my two games are actually week two versus Pittsburgh, where Russell Wilson is going to be returning to Mile High. So it's going to be kind of a revenge game, a rematch for him, and then week seven at New Orleans, where Sean Payton makes his very first return to New Orleans. I agree with you. Those are more statement games than competition games. Um, but yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how the team performs in those emotional games.
All right, that wraps up the Denver Broncos. So let's get to the last team on our list for today, the Los Angeles Chargers. My biggest strength that I listed for them uh, is the play action and the run game. So this season, they were Austin Eckler is no longer there. They replaced him with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, a very proven, solid duo. There's been a little bit of injury history, um, but overall, when they're on a run-heavy team, they perform really, really well. And I dove into the numbers a little bit, and Justin Herbert averages over a yard more per attempt on play action than his overall average. So I think play action is going to be a really solid option for them. You mix in the solid run game, and this is going to be a deadly combination for any defense that tries to beat the Chargers. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree completely. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh, both Harbaughs, frankly, are known for something very specific, and that is pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock. Jim Harbaugh brought in his brother's good friend, Greg Roman, who was the Baltimore Ravens offensive coordinator for a very long time. Again, they're known for one thing: pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock. They don't care about having a Justin Jefferson or a Brandon Ayuk or any receiver like that who's just the guy because they don't need them. They need a couple of okay receivers who can catch the ball on third and long. Other than that, they're going to hand off the ball up the middle. They're going to hand off the ball on a stretch. They're going to hand it back off up the middle, and then they're going to hand it off to a stretch. That's how these offenses run. And frankly, that's going to be really good for Los Angeles because it's going to take that pressure off of Justin Herbert. Just signed a big contract. There's been a lot of pressure, questions of is he actually the guy? I think he's very much the guy, but allowing him to get into a more quarterback friendly offense that allows him to not throw it 60 times a game is going to be very healthy for him. Obviously, there's some concerns about J.K. Dobbins and his health and availability. But I honestly am not super concerned, especially with the drafting of Kimani Vidal in the sixth round, who is another running back. So they've got a lot of options here. So I honestly I don't see them really having an issue. Something to note is they did sign former Baltimore Raven Ben Mason, who was undrafted, backed up Patrick Ricard, never really got a lot of play time, but he's very similar to Patrick Ricard. I think he's only 24, 25 years old, knows that same Baltimore offense. So I think that he's going to be very useful to them as well.
Yeah, I think those are great points. What do you have as your biggest strength for them?
For my biggest strength, I have the front seven. I think that bringing in a new defensive coordinator in Jesse Minter, who was the Michigan defensive coordinator last year, it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period. But I think that they are just naturally strong there. Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa are, I mean, a horrific duo for anybody who faces them. The addition of Puna Ford down in the trenches and Bud Dupree as a rotational pass rusher is going to be very good for them. And Jesse Minter is very, very good with those alternating sets, with rotating his pass rushers. And I think that especially with the middle linebackers that they've brought in, especially Junior Colson in the draft and Denzel Perryman, I think that it's going to be a very strong front that offenses aren't going to want to face by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I hopefully the rotation will help with some of Joey Bosa's penalty issues as well. I know he gets pretty heated out there, and maybe being able to rotate a little bit more will help him out there. Next up for biggest weakness, I think this one was a little obvious, at least for me. Wide receivers. There's no one out there. Now, Herbert is probably going to do fine. I think he's still going to make it work because I think he's a top five quarterback in the league. He's amazing. He has all of the talent. I still think he's going to perform statistically. But I think more of that's going to be on him and less on the receivers now at this point. Potentially the best receivers they have are their two early draft picks in Lad McConkey and Brendan Rice. They might be the best two receivers on the roster. Right? With the loss of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, that takes away most of the passes that Herbert's thrown in his career so far. And so I don't know what that's going to look like with these young, slightly less impressive receivers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my biggest weakness was also that pass catching core. I think that they did a very good job of bringing in Will Disley and Hayden Hurst, who are two decently solid tight ends. So I think that that will help the issue, especially given that they run a lot of 22, two tight ends, two running backs. Obviously, drafting Lad McConkey, I think that Lad McConkey is going to be the best receiver on this team, but he can't do it himself. I agree completely. I think the entire coaching staff is praying that 2023 first rounder Quentin Johnston can get over his catching woes, especially the drops. And if he can, you know, those issues will be a lot less prevalent given, like I said, the two tight end sets and then McConkey and Johnston. But outside of those two, if either of them gets hurt, if one of them starts dropping everything, whatever the case, they'll be relying on a pretty ragtag band given DJ Chark and Josh Palmer, and then seventh rounders, Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson. I'm a big, big fan of Cornelius Johnson. I think he fell in the draft because of his route tree, but I think that he's one of the strongest handed receivers in this draft. I watched pretty much every throw from JJ McCarthy this past season. And one of the interesting things from that Michigan film was every time it was third down, every time McCarthy was under pressure, he had one guy he would go to every single time, and it wasn't Roman Wilson, who was that number one receiver. He went in the second round to, I think, Pittsburgh. Um, Instead, it was Cornelius Johnson. Little 6'1", 6'2" guy, but he's got the best hands. Nobody was going to stop him. So I think that their pass catching core is stronger than it was before the draft. But I agree completely. It is a weakness, and it's probably their biggest one.
Yeah, absolutely. That brings us to the X factor. I have Justin Herbert. He is the offense. He went down with injury last year, and you could tell he was trying to play through uh, his first injury, and then the second one was just too much, and he wasn't able to finish out the season. Um, but he really is just so impressive when he is on the field, and the team suffers when he's not there. So I felt like it was a pretty easy pick to select him at X Factor.
Yeah, I put something different, but I totally agree with where you went with Justin Herbert. Obviously, if he struggles, the team's going to struggle. If he doesn't struggle, the team's not going to struggle too much. Um, I kind of went down the same road as you. Obviously, we know their run game's going to be great just because it's a Harbaugh offense. But my X factor is actually Quentin Johnston, um, which I think is an interesting one. But the reason that I put Quentin Johnston is if he can get over those struggles that I mentioned before, he turns this pass catching core from arguably the weakest part of this team to actually a really good complement to the Harbaugh run game. This team is overall very strong. Genuinely, they shouldn't have won only 5 games last year. And that defense is super talented. I think that Jesse Minter is going to make them even better than they appear. So I genuinely believe that if Quentin Johnston can play the way that he should, then him, Lad McConkey, that tight end group will make that passing game good enough that the run game will make that offense a very powerful one. And this team could be a playoff contender very quickly if Quentin Johnston can play up to his first round pedigree.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Moving on, who do you have for your notable rookie for the Chargers?
My notable rookie, I think I talked about this in a previous episode. I'm a big fan of the Chargers draft as a whole. Um, Super awesome picks all around. But one of my favorite picks is the obvious one, the fifth overall pick, Joe Alt, out of Notre Dame. He is an absolute mauling player in the run game. Um, just jump back and look at he was a tight end coming into college. He never should have been this good this quickly on the college level. By the time he was graduating college and going to the NFL and all of this, he was one of the best tackles to ever touch the college turf, let alone just in his draft class. He is a future Hall of Famer. There's no question about it. He's going to make this Harbaugh run game work the way that he wants it to work. The line is going to run through Joe Alt, and his passing is going to be incredible. There's a real chance that Joe Alt is the tackle for Justin Herbert his entire career. And that is a very, very good thing for Justin Herbert. And I think that a lot of people wanted the Chargers to go receiver at number 5. I think Justin Herbert was definitely sitting at home celebrating when they took Joe Alt. He needs that protection. He missed half a season last year because he didn't have that protection. And Joe Alt is going to be an incredible protector for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I picked the exact same player. I was hoping the Titans were going to be able to take him a little bit later, but I think the Chargers made a good decision. Again, they're still definitely lacking at receiver, um, but hopefully Joe Alt being able to protect and give Herbert more time will help elevate those receivers who might not be as good, but gives Herbert more time to be able to get the ball to them. So I think that's a solid rookie, best pick that they could have possibly taken at that point. That brings us lastly to the biggest games. First up, I have both games against the Chiefs, weeks 14 and 4. Those games over the last couple of years have all been really, really tight. Close games, kind of shootouts when Herbert is playing. And while the Chiefs have gotten the upper hand for the most part, if this Chargers team can put something together, they may be able to steal a couple wins from the Chiefs this year. What do you think about
I agree completely. As I said before, I'm a big fan of Harbaugh. I'm a big fan of Jesse Minter. I think they have an incredible coaching staff that's going to make this team that, mind you, won 9 games 2 years ago look way better than they actually are. I think that they're going to coach these guys up beyond their potential, and their potential is already a 9 or 10 win team. So I think that if any team in this division is going to give Kansas City a run for their money, it's going to be Los Angeles. My other notable game was against Baltimore. It's the Harbaugh Bowl. If everybody remembers, the Harbaugh is playing San Francisco Baltimore 2012 Super Bowl. It's the first time since then that these two coaches have met. And I think that it'll be just a really interesting game to kind of see those teams clash because both of them are going to be very good teams.
it? Yep, I agree. That is the other game that I had listed as well, is Week 12 against Baltimore. Uh, Obviously, two really good teams, potential playoff uh, matchup there, or implications for the playoffs, both being AFC teams. It could be a really solid matchup. and decently late in the season, so we should have a good grasp on what those two teams look like at that point.
Yeah, the AFC picture will be pretty clear at that point. So if the Chargers are in contention, we'll know.
So that wraps up our deep dive for the AFC West.
Yeah. So if I'm correct, we're going to be going NFC West next. I'm super excited for that one. Obviously, I've already started watching film, started prepping my documents and everything. Braden, it was super great talking to you as always. It was super awesome to have all of you viewers. Great thanks to those of you who watched. Quick challenge to you. If you, our viewers, could each share this video with one person you know, just one person, that would help us a lot. We absolutely love talking about football, and the more support that we get from you guys, the better. Big thank you to our editors, Jack and Ethan. You don't see them, but they are what truly brings this together. We can't do it without them, so big thank you to them. And we will see you guys next week.